Good afternoon. Welcome to Art Salon. We are here to talk with Khalil Joreige and Joana Hadjithomas about the Lebanese Rocket Society with Aaron Cezar, the director of Delfina Foundation. This is going to just be more of a conversation, really, and a chat, and please feel free as the audience if you have points to discuss or ask us. We'll also open it up for formal questions at the end. We'll begin actually with a small presentation by Khalil and Joana about their recent book that came out today. So please go ahead.
Okay, we're very happy to be here today with you to have this informal talk. And of course, it's for the launching of this book, but we are going to talk more about our last project, that is the Lebanese Rocket Society. And maybe to say 2 words about our practice, we are filmmakers and artists. We began working in the end of the Lebanese civil wars, and in a generation that was always questioning the writing of history. And for example, Khalil and me, we've been always questioning to our present, the way we can exist in it, the power of images, what kind of images we could produce, how to give it where was the stature of these images too. And for example, we used a lot of popular images of like postcards. We subtracted our images from the flow, working on latent images that we took without developing them for years. And we did a lot of films asking questions to and using about how do you say a story when you live in a country where there is no, in a way, history that we can relate to all together, and what kind of work you do, for example. Sorry. We worked a lot too on this idea of searching for the emergence of an individual, a political subject, a thinking subject in in societies that are very communitarian too. For the last years, we've been very interested in creating situations in which we could exist, creating to a performative way to question the relation we have with images and with politics. For example, in a film like Je veux voir, where you use a body of cinema like Catherine Deneuve, or in this last film of the Rocket Society, where we reconstitute a rocket and we transported it in the street of Beirut.
So this is what brings us to the new project that we've been working on since 2009. So it's called the Lebanese Rocket Society. There is a feature documentary film that is launched in several countries called The Strange Tale of the Lebanese Space Race, and several artistic and plastic installations that are part of this project. So it starts actually with this image, a kind of stamp, an image in which we didn't believe at the beginning. It was just a drawing, but after we found a real image, and this image didn't match with our imaginary, didn't match with, we do not recognize it, even if there's a Lebanese flag on it. So it's actually, we start our research asking around us in our surrounding, like our friends, people, parents, and even historians, if anybody knows about this project. And it was amazing because there was a lack and a gap in this, nobody was remembering it. So let's talk about a few words about this project, because it starts in a university, in an Armenian university in Lebanon called the Haigazian University, where a group of students with a professor of mathematics start a project for space study. They managed to produce...
This was in 1960.
Between 1960 and 67, they conceived, produced, and launched more than 10 rockets. These rockets' names were Cezars. So what was amazing is that rockets, even in 63, it raised the stratosphere and have a range of more than 600 kilometers. So they were quite efficient. And what is more bizarre for us that nobody was remembering such a story. So for us, it's also...
and it was a story that was greatly very popular, with a lot of very present in the press, so everyone was talking about, and it disappeared totally from the memories, I think, at the end of the 60s.
Yes, for example, we went to see in newspaper clippings, and it was really in the front pages of a lot of newspapers. So how come such a project withdraw completely of our imaginary? So.
But when we started researching, we found some images and some press clippings, but there was no real footage of the work. And we begin asking ourselves, usually you think that things disappear from memory because it's a traumatic moment. We always said that Lebanon had a very long period of amnesia because of the civil wars. But here you have a positive project, something that we should remember. We didn't do a lot of scientific achievement, and we don't. So when we were searching for a document, we find an album that was the beginning of a body of work that we did. That was an album, a 32-page album that the Lebanese Rocket Society gave to the president of the Republic at that time, Fuad Shahab. And this album was all around Cedar 4, so the most emblematic rocket, because it's the one that is on the stamp too. And we did an installation called the Album of the President, folding all this image that you see, folding in 32 parts, like the 32 images of the album. And of course, the idea is that there is 32 each time. In each image, you have the whole image, and you just have to, the memory is still here, and you have to unfold it to see it. It's like always the history is still there. And when we had this document, little by little, we were thinking that it's strange not to have any element of this project. So why don't we give this project a physicality? So let's make a sculpture, a reconstitution of this rocket, and offer it to the university when this project began, where this project began, the Haigazian University. And it happened that this rocket was built in a factory in Baye. That was exactly the same place where this group of students were launching rockets in the 60s. So we thought these rockets used to come from Haigazian to Baye and being launched there. So now we're going to bring her back from Baye to Haigazian. And of course, this idea is to put the rocket on a truck and take it back. And so everyone could see it. Of course, it raised a lot of questions and a lot of problems, because you don't easily take on the roads of Beirut a rocket that looks like a missile. But at the same time, it's the only way to really raise the question and to say, this is not a weapon. This is a moment where we used to have this impression that we could be contemporary with the rest of the world, that we will raise questions about science. We were utopian researcher, and so to a little bit give a tribute to this dreamer and to re-question this position.
Even the word rocket is something that people don't use now. I mean, the word rocket is almost, it sounds like out of a children's game. You think missile, especially you see an image like that. I mean, the word rocket would never come to my mind.
But this is what was amazing, is that in the 60s, such a project was made for peace. Mm-hmm. You can even imagine, because in this university, it's a Protestant university led by a pastor, a reverend. Mm-hmm. So it was for him, through education, we were building peace. And today, imagining a rocket is only a missile. So there's a shrinking of the meanings of a rocket. And we have to fight to enlarge that meaning, to at least layer it with the different meanings. So it's exactly where we can intervene. So it's really a kind of, it's not just to show the complexity of some situation, but it's also trying to enlarge the meaning and our territory. So this is why the rebuilding a rocket was very important for us. It's part of the project. It started after the invitation of the Sharjah Biennale in 2011, actually, where we were, the curators knows about our research, and they invite us to do something. And we didn't imagine that it will take us for such a long places, because
it was, I was just going to interrupt and say that it was also equally complicated, from what I understand, to present the work in Sharjah, because you actually moved the rocket. To move the rocket through the streets of Beirut was complicated, but to move it from Lebanon to the UAE must have been equally complicated.
It was very complicated because we had to go and see a lot of people, and the army couldn't understand why we wanted to take a rocket to Sharjah. Like, it's like, why now in Lebanon, where the big issue in a way is the missiles and all this, why do you want to do this? Like,
we are supposed to import rockets, not to export.
So we wanted, of course, to raise this question of territory. It's only in the territory of art and the territory of science, like the Sharjah Biennale and the university, that there's no misunderstanding on this object. And you know, Khalil was talking about shrinking the meanings. It's true that when we begin this research, we went to Google, and we Googled Lebanese Rocket Society, and we had only missiles and war images. Yeah, and today, if you, for maybe a very symbolic moment, if you type it, you will have more picture of this project.
What was interesting for us is by trying to embody this absence of the history of the rockets and the space race, the Lebanese space race, it was really trying to make it as a sculpture, a monument, in a place where monuments are very problematic, because we are not agreeing on a monument where we can recognize ourselves. Like, we have to imagine that in Lebanon that we still don't have a book of history in
common.
In school. We stopped our history in 43 after it's a place of debate, let's say. So it's for us, it was really try to also, in such a project, to take the risk and to experience something that's part of the performative that we want, is also to try to tell a story when there's so many gaps. So it's also a way for us to activate a kind of chain of transmission between a past and a present. It's to reactivate a past into the present. So it was very important as an attempt, as an experience. And it's also this kind of performance, it's something that we already have in a previous work, like in I Want to See, Je veux voir, with Catherine Deneuve, when we took her at the borders between Lebanon and Israel, and invoking the cinema, the history of cinema and the cinema by itself, to try to open a small road. And suddenly this territory become a territory of cinema. So for us, it's very important to this kind of negotiation in the reality. Imagine that to ship a rocket first from Beirut to Sharjah, and also from Bayet to Beirut, took us like several months. You can see it in the film. We see ministers, we go to several media for data mining, not to be misunderstood, and nobody sends us another kind of missile. So it's really about this kind of thing. So actually, this is a kind of... when we ship it, we decided not to make it discreetly. So we really put it in a truck and cross the cities of Lebanon. With a convoy, of course.
Of course.
And this is its arrival. So you can see it in the university and in front of the Museum of Sharjah, because it's in these two territories that we can avoid any kind of misunderstanding. It can appear as a science project or as an art project. Mm-hmm. So it's really trying to enlarge our territories.
So I think, you know, Aaron, you obviously have had to deal with a variety of artists and kind of fantastical projects in your work. And I think you have also had, you know, conversations with Khalil and Joana in the past and seen this. And I think, you know, working as we all do in a space with many Middle Eastern, kind of political debates, and this work with artists and enlarging, kind of that meaning of what it is something you deal with every day.
What I found quite interesting about this particular work is, of course, the kind of the use of the archive, but not monumentalizing kind of the archive, and not fetishizing images that come from the archive, which can be a tendency kind of by artists when dealing with historical kind of material. And I know there was a strong attempt by the pair of you to avoid that particular situation. But when I look at this work, I'm also reminded of kind of this particular time, this decade of like hope and optimism, of Pan-Arabism by Jamal Abdel Nasser. And he made this famous speech where he talked about how the Arab world would produce everything from the needle to the rocket. And also, there's been other artists who have also looked at this particular time period as a place of potential, but also of failure, too, at the same time. So I was thinking about Ala Yunus's work, Nefertiti, which worked with sewing machines that were produced in Egypt during the 50s and 60s. And what she did with her film was to actually document discussions with women and people who use these machines. But it was done from a nostalgic point of view. And again, that's a slight difference from what you've done with this project, is trying to avoid the nostalgic kind of connections. And I want to ask a little bit about that, working with the archive, with kind of the past, but also your documentary film, which I know everyone here hasn't had a chance to see, but at the end, it looks out into the future, into 2025, and what would have happened if the Lebanese Rocket Society didn't stop in 1967 with the Six-Day War. So could you kind of speak a bit about kind of working with the archive, and also this idea like science fiction in terms of looking at the future?
Back to the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really important not to be nostalgic, because especially when you do something like an achievement, people would say, look where we were and where we are now. And of course, the fact that it began in 1960s and in 1967, it's very obvious that we really have to deal with Pan-Arabism, with all the defeat, the Arab defeat after 67. It has to do with the idea of being contemporary, sharing the same time, and of course, with all this period of the Cold War and the yearning for modernity. So all of this are contained in the project. So we really wanted to avoid this nostalgia of the golden 60s that is always present. And usually, Khalil and me, we don't really work on archives. We work on our present. So we tried to bring back this past into the present. This is why, for example, we did this kind of reenactment with the rocket, but it's more, we don't really talk about reenactment. We talk like at a moment when you bring something from the past into the present, and you can create a kind of shock, and something can happen, maybe. Of course, you can fail too, but it's part of what you are trying to do.
Actually, we tried to use a concept. I don't know if it will work. It's a reenaction. It's actually doing something again that is nearly script. Like, for example, restage, reenactment. It's things that are made, and you are following a kind of script.
And you do it for the first time. Yeah. It's like you do it again, but you do it for the first time.
We noticed that it was not on purpose, but there is several strategies of redoing something from the past in the present in the film. Like the rocket's name is Reconstitution. And the photographic series is called Restaged, where we, after 6 months after we shipped the real rocket, we decided to take a board. Actually, I can see some images of this one. You see, we ship a fake one in a 2D board. So it's a rocket in 2D. So it's not frightening anymore. So we can take our time. So, and this is a fake rocket with exactly the same convoy on the same trip. But what will be performative is a time lapse of the taking of the picture. So it's not made on Photoshop. It's really a photographic performance. The time of the crossing of the convoy will be the time. So you have to repeat it several times, and you are on the highway.
Yeah, you replay a little bit what is being replayed. We were searching for the trace of a trace, because an archive is always a trace, and so how we can produce something that would be, far from the archives, but like you take a substantial thing, finding the trace of it.
But what
this was a
interests
project called Restage.
What interests us in also the attempt of invoking a past into the present is to try to overcome and surpass this rupture, this breach between past and present. And this we have to quote a little bit Anna Arendt in the preface of the Crisis of the Culture, where she's invoking that there's a breach when there's a rupture. And by invoking this past, you try to project yourself into an uncertain future. And this is what brings us to the science fiction, because we notice that in the Arabic world there's nearly no science fiction, or at least no anticipation, difficulty in projecting ourselves. So
these images, like they are acting against something from the past, but it's like future, something that science fiction too is present in these images, because you have only this trace, like you know, something is passing in the city.
How important was it for you two to make a feature-length film about the process? I mean, because the Lebanese Rocket Society as a work has existed as photographs, as a sculpture, even as a rug. And so why was it important to then also include a feature-length documentary?
Did you always plan on doing the film?
Yes, we begin with a film.
Yeah, you begin with the idea of doing a film.
We were searching for the film. Yeah. And while we were searching for the film, it ended up that we did, because you know the pace of a film and of art is not the same. It's longer to make a film, to bring money, to do the editing, to everything. So, and while we were doing this, we did this art installations that are part of the film now.
Yeah, we are not traditional filmmaker. Like, it's not that we found the money, then we start the film. Since we are having also our production company with a producer in Lebanon called George Air and Aboud Production, we can start an adventure from even if you have just an idea. So we start this idea not knowing exactly where we were going. For example, the feature film with Catherine Deneuve, it could be a short film, and it ended into being a long feature film that was shown, that premiered in Cannes. This one, it could be just a short film. We don't plan. It's not a career. Like, we prefer to define ourselves as researchers. So it can be a film, it can be an artwork, it depends. We like to scramble the borders.
But it was interesting to do both, because usually we do our films and we do artworks that are related thematically, but not really the same subject. Or, you know, here it was the first time where we had the chance to do a film and to put little by little all the artwork that we were doing into the film. So it's really linked, and it was a new experience for us. We'd never had the chance to do both, because usually you have to define yourself, define the work you're doing, like you're a filmmaker and you do some art, or you're an artist doing films, or this is film. And here it's a different situation, and we thought it will raise interesting questions for us and maybe for others.
But it's also because it's like addressing a historical, you know, it's a historical project, I suppose. And I think, you know, you've probably had to deal with that many times over with, you know, your artists. I mean, do you find that they often look back at history with this nostalgia? I think.
Absolutely. I mean, of course. I mean, I think one of the main issues, though, for the resident artists that we work with from the Middle East and North Africa is that actually the cultural infrastructure is quite weak, and actually the educational system is very fragmented. So even in terms of studying kind of art history, it only goes up until maybe the 1960s. It doesn't go kind of beyond that. So artists have to really take the initiative to kind of look back and reflect, and it's often through conversations with their peers, just through looking at archives and also looking at other artists' work and other practices to kind of develop the conceptual nature of their work much more. What's interesting about you two is that you've delved into both a series of different worlds, the contemporary art kind of world and market, and also the cinematic world. And effectively, you have to found your own kind of place and role, which is kind of been constantly shifting, particularly in the case of Lebanon, because the political situation is kind of constantly shifting. So I actually want to throw back a question back to Joana and Khalil about kind of your role as artists. And I know that you teach in Lebanon, but also you're part of the academic board for the Ashkelon Academy. So you're supporting a number of emerging artists that are coming up. What are you seeing kind of on the ground there?
You know, situations change a lot. When we begin working at the end of the 90s, it was, there was no institution really that you could work with. We worked a little bit with Ashkal Alwan, Christine Tame, and there was no market really. You had some galleries that would be interested more in modern, maybe contemporary paintings, but not really installation or photography. So we end up being this generation together, working together, because we didn't really have, you know, places to exhibit our work. We did it in the public places, and this was really interesting because there was no space for art. Christine would do, Tommy would do exhibition in a lot of different spaces, and so it was addressing a lot of questions to the place where we were working. And I think most of us would consider that their work is more for the in situ, you know, in the place where we are working, and we were interested in that. And then the work began to travel, but now it's totally different because Lebanon is a very precise place where a lot of people come. There's a market for the Arab world. You know, it's changed a lot. So in the school, for example,
and we are not having a nostalgia here.
No, it's not. We are not. It's not our type. Yeah. But it's now with the school we have to think like, what can we give to the students that are already artists, and what can we? And the school is changing every year, you know, because we don't know. We are searching with them.
But you're also very involved with the idea of public space,
yeah,
in bringing your work, and also I'm sure, you know, your students into the idea of what a public space is. And I think we've seen that particularly the last 2 weeks with what's happening in Istanbul. It all began with a fight for public space. So.
Yeah, and what is amazing is that we had to invent some process, not just of producing things, but to present them and to even connect. Because, for example, for what we call our generation, even we are not the same age, but we didn't know each other. Like, we didn't grow up all together. We didn't study in the same school, but we had some same interests. So we have to create a kind of constellation. We were attracted. And we start to have a very critical relation. Like, I was asking my constellation of artists to give me a feedback because there was a lack of critic, for example, a lack of thinking and discourse about the work. So this is what generates.
We were a little bit alone.
Yeah.
So it's different now.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why, I mean, we decided to start focusing on the Middle East and North Africa in terms of our residency program in London, because artists are working in isolation. Not only disconnected.
And you bring the artists together in a home.
Exactly, and trying to create a domestic kind of environment where they can have an exchange of ideas and different discourses in a place in London where there's such immense kind of resources for making materials, to engage with curators, other professionals, and so my knowledge of the region has come through that process of supporting kind of resident artists there. And so I've seen firsthand what you've also are alluding to in terms of having to kind of build communities around kind of your work. But in the context of Lebanon in particular, it's been also a fluid space as well, because it is much more connected to kind of Europe than, let's say, North Africa in Algeria or Tunis.
Yes, it's true.
You know, no, you disagree?
The Paris of the Middle East.
Yeah, the Paris, well, that's maybe being a little bit nostalgic.
It's supposed to be Switzerland of the Middle East.
But this is a kind of mythology, I think. It's a like, when we were talking about the project of the Lebanese Rocket Society, everybody was saying that the 60s were incredible. And we noticed that we were in a continuous war, for example. In 58, for example, 50,000 American GI landed in Lebanon. So there was a reason for that. You see, so it's rewriting of the history. So maybe what was important is that it's maybe not just the connection between Lebanon and outside, but the interest of some people to invent situation inside in the places where nobody was asking or even presenting this opportunity. Okay, the first exhibition we made in Lebanon, we made it in a gallery, and we sell everything. And it created a crisis with Joana and me, because it was not for that reason that we were doing this kind of thing. You see, but after, of course, it changed. Today, if I sell everything, I'm happy. But you see, it's different. The reason why we start to work, what we managed to build, what we didn't manage, change
because
also.
The context changed a lot. We began working in a city that was just going out from civil war. Everything was, you know, you had very urgent questions. Like we didn't study, for example, art or cinema. We just began doing images because you were in a country where all the traces of war were going to be erased. All this wartime was put into bracket like it was an accident, and you could feel that everything was still there. And we can see today all the tension are in a way present differently, but it's nothing was resolved. So you were like, what I'm going to do? I have to do something. I have to question the place where I live, my present.
Even the consideration for art changed. When I started my practice, for example, my father never introduced me as an artist or filmmaker, but always as a teacher. And you see, it changed. Today, an artist is also something valuable, like you would like to invite artists
but
sometimes for dinner.
This is something that changed in the whole region. Like
sometimes, just in fairs.
It's something that is really recent.
Yeah. I mean, but I think even what we see happening in Lebanon now, and I mean, of course, everybody, it's very fresh on their minds after Ashkal al-Wan, which I did not have the pleasure of going to, but you know, you were all there. I mean, that has also grown into something, you know, much more international than it was. And, you know, some people will, you know, look back again with nostalgia, our theme word of the day, when it was pure and when it was just about, you know, artists and the art. But there's something to be said about making things more public or more visible, because the reach is much, you know, more there. I'm sure you have many more Lebanese people coming to Ashkal al-Wan now than they did, you know, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, you know, how has your experience been with this reiteration and also with the university? I believe it's what, the second year?
Third
year. The second year, it's finishing. We're going to have the third year.
Mm-hmm. And how have you seen the impact now with Ashkal al-Wan? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you saw or what you experienced this past couple of weeks or the past month.
You know, for example, for myself, I think more of these places like a forum, a fair, a festival as a territory of art and cinema, usually. You know, I don't really see it because you have very international people coming, and of course it's very interesting when it's in Beirut to see who's coming from the scene and from the others and who is interested. It's being more and more, this time I think what was really interesting is that you had a lot of people from the city that would come, because always the danger is that you are just cut from the rest of the city. You just do a program for the people that you would see in other places, you know, and it will be a little bit different because it's in Beirut, but not totally different if it's in Dubai this was always something that we all think about. You know, we are very aware of this problem. We always try to see that it's for the school, it's the same. It's you have to really think that you have to be engaged in the city you are working in. If not, you know, it's like something that can grow everywhere. And for the school,
that's exactly what you, with your new building. Yeah. You're reimagining your relationship with your neighbors and with your community.
Completely. I mean, we're expanding our space in London where we host artists predominantly from the Middle East and North Africa for residency programs. And part of this expansion is about developing kind of more engagement with the city, but also engaging with the city through artistic practice and through themes that relate to that city.
Yeah. So making a library, making a garden.
Making it much more outward looking at themes and concepts that connect very much kind of with that particular place. So we're looking at issues around food, around public space as well, which also is a very kind of interesting topic to house in residence, because not only is public space being looked at critically in the Middle East and North Africa, but it's being looked at, you know, in Latin America, in Africa. We're all globally dealing with the issue about how do we define common spaces, kind of as it were. So it very much kind of connects to that outward looking. And I think with Homeworks this year, part of the program was a little bit longer as well, but it was also, for example, there was one element of the program called X Apartments, which some of you may have heard about before. because it's existed in other cities, but it engaged the students at the Ashkelon Academy in developing work for apartments in a very specific part of the city where no one would normally kind of visit. And these kind of responses, although at first it was kind of, everyone kind of approached it very dubiously, thinking, will this work out? Is it voyeurism by visiting these specific kind of people? But actually became a very kind of critical base and discussion, and also a reflection on kind of what was kind of normality within kind of Lebanon. Because for me, I mean, I've been to Lebanon quite a few times, and the first time I went to Ashkelon to the homeworks, had an amazing time. I went 2 weeks later, and it was like a near civil war. So it's such a quite kind of intense place that you actually, you know, there's a possibility for anything to kind of happen whilst one's there.
What's interesting in Lebanon is that we are not inventing a new concept. Like, we can share the same issue, for example, but it's sometimes a little bit more obvious because there is immediate reaction. Like, for example, a crisis can end it into a conflict. I think this is interesting. For example, the issue of voyeurism is not just something. Maybe we start to produce images because of an uncomfort about the way that we were perceiving ourselves. So we start to have. We were supposed to shift the gaze at least inside. So we grow up, for example, with the Orientalism, but after we have to develop some specific places inside the country, not just from the place of power, but from, this is where, for example, a work like The Latency started to interest us, is that we were existing in these places even if we were not yet fashioned or visible, but nevertheless, we were there and we were working there. So what are the reasons that will allow you to become visible and at certain circumstances? What, for example, the market will choose you at that time and not at the other. For example, why such artwork is today asked everywhere and not when we create it. It's very bizarre. And it's not just a question about we need time to do it. It's also because suddenly the question of the territory is also a question of time. This is why we use this word of contemporary, because we can share something at a certain time. And living together, this is Roland Barthes talking about it, is at least sharing a same rhythm. So let's try to live together.
Point. I was going to ask I want to ask one question to Joana Hadjithomas, because I'm kind of curious about this. So if the 1960s was the age of the space race, you know, globally, not just in the region, and there was also a time of kind of idealism for the whole of kind of the Arab world, which ultimately kind of collapsed into individual kind of nations, individual ideologies, which in a way represents the diversity of the Arab world anyway. But right now, there's probably a museum race that's happening in some parts of kind of the region, if you take the space race. And I'm kind of curious about, let's take a project like the Lebanese Rocket Society, which was about kind of hope. I mean, one of the shows of this work you called A Tribute to Dreamers, which is, I think, the most amazing title, A Tribute to Dreamers, about this project, because it was a tribute to dreamers. So now we're redreaming or dreaming up kind of the possibilities for the Gulf and building kind of cultural infrastructure that will impact the entire kind of region. I wonder what your thoughts are about that in terms of like dreaming and hope. Or is it actually, there's a cloud over this because of the political backdrop of the unstableness of the region? I don't know, I wondered your thoughts about the museum race that's happening. I know it's completely tangent and riff, but we said we would riff with the conversation, so
we are always open to this kind of riff.
Now, first, if we take your first part of the question, the tribute to dreamers, when we did this project in 2009, it was a moment where we really needed these dreamers in a way. So it was before
so-called Arabic Spring,
the Arabs revolutions, if we can say, and we were like thinking that, okay, today what are we expecting? What is the future that we want to project into? What kind of images can we produce and that we could relate to in a way? And because of course images were always about authority, about political images, but or images from that were exported. So you have to always find a way to do your own images. And questioning this, it's questioning the presentations that we have of ourselves. And these museums, in a way, we can say that it changed something in the region. But you know, I don't always think about art. I don't think art as disconnected from what is happening. I think that art is connected, for example, to all these revolutions that are happening in a way, like images, like representations. That's a fact that people want to have another kind of life. And
to have another representation of themselves, I think, in the international world. I mean, the fact is, like you said, when you think of a Lebanese rocket, the first thing that comes to your mind is a missile, not a rocket, a space rocket. And I think, by building these institutions, there's a concerted effort to think of, Arab countries as having something to offer in the cultural sense, something kind of untainted by, political representations, or war or terror or any of it. I mean, you've also been very involved with, going back and forth and involved with these institutions in a kind of advisory role in ways. I mean, let's turn the question back on you. What do you think?
Well, I think it creates a space for immense kind of potential in terms of, as you say, kind of showcasing a different side of the region and a more kind of nuanced kind of understanding of what's being present there. What's important is that there is the content to fill the spaces, that there are the people to run them that are actually from the region. And that's, I think, probably the work that needs to be done now, is actually building kind of the expertise, building the networks to support support that. Instead of just bringing in a model of the museum and this is how it works, and looking at other international models and rolling out, maybe a museum in the Arab world needs to be completely different. It actually needs to kind of take on a different kind of cultural uniqueness than kind of what can be just be brought internationally. So I think it has to remain a conversation. I think an institution has to remain in dialogue with the people it is there to serve with. And so if it doesn't become a fortified space, but something that's open and porous and open to different kind of debate, then that's really important. But in some places where these museums are being built, there's maybe not a possibility for so much debate. And that's something to kind of raise as an issue.
Yeah, not just debate, it's also about the complexity of certain situations, and we have that tendency to simplify. Like, for example, the question of a national in Lebanon, for example, it's in the middle of a lot of debate, I would say. As we were saying, there's no historical book after 1403 that is taught in the school. So the question of the monument or the national.
So
we do not.
The history books stop in 1943.
1943, yeah.
And
we do not agree after on the event.
Yeah, which story to tell? It's that.
From which side?
So just there's no discussion of it in any way.
No, there is discussion, but there is not something that can link us.
It's not the same.
Right.
It's not a common place. So for us, it's showing the complexity become very important, because we have, like, for example, if I'm, as a filmmaker, when I'm shooting in Lebanon, if I put my camera and shoot an image of you too, it's becoming problematic. It's not from the same place, because there's so, it's not like when you are in another country. We have so little images of our representation, for example, in cinema, that we have to always be careful about the use of these images and the way it is producing meanings and symbols. But these symbols are places of agreement. And so this is, so it, for example, a museum, is it national museum? It is as an Arabic word. For example, we always try to avoid the concept of Arabic representation. Are we from the Middle East, from the Arab world, from the Mediterranean? Each of these are a political statement.
When you use Mediterranean, or when you use Islamic, or when you use, it's...
So for years we were avoiding to be part of representation from the Arabic world, even if we define ourselves as Arabs. You see, but it's complex. It's to avoid the new zoo, let's say, the new this kind of representations of the. So we say we are part of this region, which is very
of this region.
Yeah,
that works too. But I think, I mean, but your work does very much deal with this idea of who you are as Lebanese, you know, what your history means to you, what your society means to you. And I think even, you know, your kind of external activities also, as Aaron was saying, you know, you're very involved with the university, you're a professor. It's also very much about, like, you know, kind of contributing to a dialogue and also contributing to education in general. And I think, is that something that you find very important kind of to continue doing with your work and your films?
Yeah, and building places. For example, we are part also of an adventure in Lebanon called Metropolis Cinema, where we it's a
venue to show films, art films.
Yeah. Are you showing the Lebanese Rocket Society there?
Yeah, we did. It's giving visibility, you know, to and trying to create the tools to think, so things can exist and can work in a different way. I think that maybe the presence of these museums and institutions we can talk a lot about, but it gave a lot of visibility too, in a way, and it provoked a lot of interest. So now this interest we have to be very careful about. Now this interest we have to really see how can we do it and show our work, but in a complex way, you know. And we are, from the beginning, what we try to do, Khalil and me, is to just show how complex are all the situation. How you cannot just, you have to shift the way people are looking at you, at your work, at your situation. So because there's no amalgam, there's no Africa, there's no Middle East, it doesn't work like that. So what we're trying to do—
At least for us, like the meaning that we don't believe in such images. We can say that we start to produce images to found places where we can recognize ourselves, where we can believe in. It was not because of a lack of representation. Like when we started our production, I would say, in terms of images, there were more than 100 TV stations in Lebanon for such a small country. You can imagine. So it's not a problem of flux images, but it's more about how we can give a power to an image in which you can say, okay, this image is talking to me and I can rely to it. So it's the same problematic that we have to face, for example, with Catherine Deneuve and Rabia Mroué when we made our film. In which kind of image I can believe after a catastrophe, after a war, which, for example, the issue of the document, it was also because it forced us to problematize the protocol of the using of some images, from where it comes, what are the contexts, how I can use it, how I cannot instrumentalize it, for example. So
this is the kind of political things we do.
Ida Saved Me. It makes me think of that performance piece, which is very interesting, about images and actually about the responsibility that one has for.
So you know, it's always like a negotiation about giving visibility, but giving complexity too. It's both all the time.
Well, I think we can maybe open it to questions. We have one quick question, I'm told. If anybody, otherwise we'll be here after the talk if anybody would like to come up and talk to us. Anything? Okay, well, on that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.